Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, good time of day.
Whatever time it is for you.
I don't know, it trips me up.
Tommy, looks like you're going to say something.
No, I mean, I'm usually used to such an exciting intro. I don't know what to do on Thursdays. I feel like we still need some hook for our Thursdays.
Should we have like a somber moment on Thursdays? Oh, it's Thursday. Almost time for a weekend and when we stop working on Power BI.
Nailed it.
You know what, my dad on Fridays getting out of the elevator after work with employees, he would go, "You know the best thing about Fridays?" And they would go, "What, John?" He'd go, 2 more days till Monday.
No, that's true. That's the best thing.
Might
be the worst thing. All right, before we get into our introductions or kind of the news here, let's talk about our main topic here. Today, we get to pull an article from a fellow MVP, Tom Martins, or Thomas, I guess would be full. I'll use his full name. Thomas Martins has written a really good article around the roles in the semantic model. So the semantic model and workspace roles, kind of really figuring out what is the separation of my data versus the content that looks at the data. So really good article, very well written. Tom, I believe, comes from a very large organization that has lots of users of Power BI in it. And so he has to really think about this at a large scale. How does this work? And what is the right pattern to see here? Because I'm sure he sees a lot of good behaviors and bad behaviors in this space as well. So with that, that's our main topic for today. Let's go through a couple news articles. Tommy, what are you finding for news here?
Yeah, so a few Fabric blog updates. The Event House is now generally available.
Okay, what is Event House? What is this Event House thing you're saying?
Yeah, the Event House, quote unquote, is the cutting edge database workspace to manage and store event-based data. It can do a few things: real-time analytics, as a scalable infrastructure, and really it's all about all the real-time events that you might try to manage in Azure. There was the streaming API we had in Power BI, and so many other places where data is coming at you fast. And what Microsoft's really been pushing and really been working on is actually having a centralized, really workspace or portal to manage all of your real-time data, both from the ingestion, getting the events, and then also managing that, querying it, and then acting on it.
So what do you think about this? I mean, I'm a little bit torn about all the real-time data stuff. I think it's interesting. I definitely think there are use cases for it. And again, I can think of some, but when I sit down and think about this, I'm thinking to myself, I'm not sure if I really understand what's the large push for real-time. Is this adding enough value to the business, or are we just trying to throw a lot of compute at something to get it to building this real-time thing? I'm not quite sure yet.
Yeah, I think right before we were, went live, we were talking about this a little bit, but one that came to mind that I wonder if this is just not competing with, but making easier within the Microsoft ecosystem is the real-time dashboard analysis of systems.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
Right. Like especially in very large distributed systems, right? Where you have many, many services in Azure that are handling events, et cetera, and depending on how you set things up in microservices, et cetera, there's a lot of activities that you want to track and or ensure are operating at a nominal level, because there are certain things that, hey, like all of a sudden you have a whole slew of customers using a new feature and they hammer the API and start extracting a bunch of data. What is that doing to your systems? And the real-time events are like, there are dashboards that companies use, including ours, to ensure alerts are fired off or people can see what's going on. And that I think is probably the most poignant one, as opposed to some of the kind of more analytical facing kind of things we've kind of talked about in the past.
Yeah. I think that, again, I keep leaning on the decision point of, real time makes sense when people are watching and paying attention and getting information. When I have to do actions on data very quickly. I feel like there's a miss in my mind where in weekends, in the evenings, people aren't really needing that data to be real time. Like, so there's like a window. It's like
Mhm.
I need to be alerted when I'm available and in the business is actively running. But then what's the purpose of having the rest of the 12 hours or 18 hours that you're not even looking at the dashboards, right? Does that stuff still need to be real time? I need to kind of turn it on and turn it off when I need to. I don't know. I'm
Well,
because I keep thinking about
once
when do I
once
see the
again though,
data till when I see the action
One-
I need to take.
yeah, once again though, Mike, I think you're leaning a bit into your
Probably
your
experiences.
experience as far as
Yeah.
being an analytics person, right? Like,
Maybe.
one of the greatest moves I ever made was going from a DBA into business intelligence,
Sure.
because typically we aren't the critical 24-hour 7 days a week individual.
That's
But
true.
just
But there is
because you're
critical
not
stuff.
working during
That's
the
true.
weekend, right?
Someone
There
is.
are people that do monitor and make sure
That's true.
systems are still working,
Very true.
because there's a lot of data movement that happens over the weekends,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
if you think even in terms of, large data extractions, resetting, reprocessing a whole bunch of data, things like that, when do companies want to do that? It's the weekend. So if you're supporting that, like,
Yep.
those dashboards are still very relevant because there's probably people monitoring them.
It's definitely still niche. However, I think there's going to be a bit of an expansion of the types of scenarios. A big part of this too is you can do real time on Fabric items and artifacts. So
Sure.
it's loaded into a lakehouse, and it's very seamless. And I think Microsoft's really pushing that. Real time data has always been very difficult to pull for a non developer. What's the SDK you're using? What is the platform you're using? How are you actually gathering that data in? You're going to need to know the schema, but now we can. And there's actually another blog article that Fabric released right after this about getting events, which really giving a UI where it's like, hey, I want to know anytime a new row is added to Fabric to my lake house.
Sure.
While not the like IT security or supply chain or call centers real time needed,
Mhm.
we've used a lot of that with Power Automate. It was like, hey, anytime a new record's added, we wanted to trigger some type of action.
That I do see being a use case, and I see that more frequently. I think of real time, and maybe where I'm thinking of. I think of real time as like constantly having emitted events throughout time. I do think there's a much, to your point, Tommy, and what Seth you were saying, I think earlier, is there is this use case of, hey, I'm going to get a handful of files at this time in the morning. Every time a file shows up, I should process that file or go find that file and go do some stuff with it. So I have been doing some experimentation with the blobs. You have a blob storage event hub. So blob storage has event grid that goes along with it. And so you can tap into other Azure services where when things show up, you have the ability of saying, hey, I'm able to detect something showed up here. An event is now created, a new file appeared, and now I should go do something. Run this notebook, go run this pipeline. So now that you mentioned this, Seth, maybe this is also a bit of a competitive piece around. You look at what happens inside Databricks, they have a very compelling story of do things in batches or micro batches, or with 1 or 2 lines of code changes, you can now stream data in. Here's how streaming data looks like. So maybe there's a competitive edge here of, Snowflake and or Databricks that I'm not seeing as much or as frequently that this use case is attacking. And that could be a very valid use case.
Yeah, I think ones that I think about immediately are a while ago when Microsoft like plugged into the IoT data, and they're very relevant use cases, I think, for like delivery services or something, but it didn't take off quite in terms of like that type of data syncing with some of the analytics data. And I do like how, and I got to play with this specific flavor of events, right? But there's always a need in the past to kind of marry up the live stuff with yesterday's or previous data, right? Like, and
Yes.
the system needs to handle kind of both of those to produce some of the full-fledged reporting that really hits home with, I think, a lot of the use cases that I'm familiar with.
I think this is a neat idea. I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes. Another theme I feel like I'm hearing a lot here is there's this KQL database. I'm hearing a lot of people say, hey, KQL is interesting. You should be exploring it. However, I'm not seeing a lot of other MVPs or other teams, or I don't feel like I hear a lot of blog posts from the community around the KQL database yet. Doesn't mean I shouldn't be knowing about it, but it feels like it's this new thing that people haven't quite explored yet. And I'm looking for more, I guess, maybe community activity around where the KQL stuff is going as well. So this also seems to be tied very well with the real-time stuff additionally. All right. Maybe we move over to the next thing. I think another part of this that is pairing with this real-time data is you now have the ability to connect and stream events into your Fabric environments. So there is a Get Events blog article that just came out, Tommy.
Yeah. So this is kind of going along with making the Event Hub generally available. Again, the biggest hurdle for a lot of people with trying to do streaming or real-time data is the source, the metadata, the schema, and then what application or where you actually going to actually pull it into.
Yeah.
They're making that really easy in the same way that you would connect to a data source and a data flow in the service. They're making this pretty darn tootin' easy. And I've been testing this out with a SQL database because that's one of the other things that they're releasing is not just your normal Event Hub and Internet of Things, but you also have SQL databases. We also have
Cosmos DB,
Cosmos,
Postgres,
Google, PubSub.
MySQL. Yeah.
So there's a ton, and the SQL databases, the data capture. I think it's the what is it? CDC stands for
Change Data Capture.
That needs to be enabled, but it's basically choosing your source. Just do some basic configuration, and you're really good to go. Which honestly is more impactful, more significant than you may think. Just to put a UI on that.
So this is one I've been complaining about for a while. I just maybe this is part of my solution that I need to start thinking about. I always have this challenge of, hey, Microsoft, I'm doing this listening to new data type thing all the time. A lot of work I spend is, hey, I'm gonna batch a bunch of data in. I'm gonna go get the data from a server from some location, hit an API call, something, and the data will just come to me. It'll show up inside my environment. What I want Microsoft to make this easy is just make it current. Here's the keys that I care about. Make it work. Just update the records where it needs to be updated, bring the data in. And it sounds to me, this is a very close feature to what Change Data Capture is doing. So if you have a SQL database, if you have some information that's changing somewhere else, you can turn on the Change Data Capture. And maybe this also dovetails very closely with mirroring. Yeah, so data mirroring is this other idea of like, hey, I'm going to mirror what's in that other system. It will send me only the Change Data Capture elements, and I'll be able to stitch them back together and produce a table that is actually real as to what's happening in production. That seems really interesting to me. And I think that maybe will solve or simplify some of my pipelines potentially. Just need more data sources. Like, not everyone has SQL or Cosmos or MySQL. There's going to be other weird stuff going on. So it'll be interesting to see how that works. So it's another good article out there. And the last one here, Tommy, this is probably you're probably the biggest fan of this one because you love VS Code. Like, you're a big VS Code guy.
I love me some VS Code. Gerald Burkell, Seth,
Gerhard Bruckel.
You are incredible at pronouncing.
I've also met Gerhard, so
I've met a lot of people, and my friend, I still have a terrible time. If you are a VS Code, Visual Studio Code user, he has created a extension called Power BI Studio, and I believe just 2 days ago it was released for version 2, which has some major new features. Just version 1, if you don't even get the update, simply allowed you to look at all your workspaces, all the semantic models. You could actually do APIs off the semantic model off a workspace just simply by choosing it. Now, some of the major new features. There's integration with external tools in Power BI Desktop.
Huge. I like that one a lot.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Bring down your files, Get your PBI files there, and then open with Tabular Editor right from the UI. That's smart.
There's some on memory statistics, but there's going to be a lot more support for the Fabric APIs. I've had some frustrations with the Fabric APIs from a credential point of view, so I'm really excited to see this. But again, just that additional new features along with what it's already been, I use it quite a bit, and it's a great way to look at the service and what's going on. So definitely take a look at that.
I will say this. I feel like I've been looking at the Fabric APIs over the last couple months or so, and boy, have the number of Fabric APIs really grown here recently. There is a ton of APIs now showing up, and it feels like every time I look, the list keeps getting longer and longer and longer. There is a whole bunch of functionality coming to us in those APIs now. So very interesting there. Really neat to see them building out all these new API pieces, item management, administration stuff, and then there's like almost APIs for every single, feature: Spark, Event Hubs, Lakehouse, mirrored warehouses, ML experiments, ML models, like notebooks. All this stuff exists in here. So there's a lot of interesting things that are going on there inside the Fabric APIs. Got to figure out how people are going to use them. It'll be interesting to see what people decide is valuable inside those Fabric APIs. Excellent. Let's go to the news. Let's jump into our main topic for today. So our main topic for today is from, again, we said earlier, Tom Martins, the separation of data and content. So I'll throw the article here in the chat window here, and let's jump into some of this. Seth, maybe give us a quick overview of a little bit of the article where you feel like this is where we should start talking about this one.
I'm chuckling here because I really hope people have the opportunity to meet Tom, and he goes to a few conferences here and there. Yep. But he's such an articulate guy. He's like, as you said before, he works for a larger organization. It's almost like he's like the old guy who's seen it all.
Yeah.
And he just lets you talk, and then he figures out exactly where he wants to, give his nugget of deep experience.
Wisdom. I would agree. This is exactly how I perceive him as well.
And he writes that way as well, which is fantastic, because in a world where we talk about all of the things in Fabric and all the ways we can do, the thing and different features that have been added, he's very specific about the areas that he's talking about and the benefits that it provides. So essentially, this article that we're going to review today is a question that he received, because he's still in the Fabric community answering questions. And the question is, how can users create their own reports, but with RLS applied? And what we're going to talk about today is, how do you do that in a very specific way? And what are the reasons why you may want to? And we're going to bash the idea back and forth.
Excellent. I like it.
So we've talked about this a few times on our podcast, and I know, Mike, you brought this up in a user group, I think years ago, about this idea of, should we have all of our semantic models in a given workspace and then reports in another? This is just continuing to go on that route. And I've seen this a lot with also managed self-service, where all the models, where all the power users, so to speak, would be able to grab the semantic models from.
And so this is, I mean, I like how Tom was very, to your point, Seth, Tom was very clear about what this article is meant to answer the question around. I have a content creator. They need to create some content, but the consumer of that content is not allowed to see all of the data. So,
not the consumer.
Sorry,
it's technically the consumer of the model that has to build reports, because they're also a content creator.
That's true,
but they can't. So it's specific around the security of the data within it. Yes. Where, like a situation we talk about all the time is we're the BI dev team.
Correct.
We're creating a model with row level security, and there are needs within the organization of other content creators to build reports off the model, but they can only see their slice.
And let me reiterate what you said, because to make sure I'm hearing you correctly and reading the article correctly too. It's not the person who's consuming the content we're trying to hide the data from. It's the idea that the person making the reports, the content creator, the person literally building the next thing, they're expected to have row level security applied as they're doing the build of said report.
Doing the build.
Yeah,
yes.
I'm not talking about an app. We're not talking about a different workspace. We're talking about that individual who's expected to show up to that data model. We want their credentials pre-applied with row level security, so that way that when they're generating that new report, it's already pre-filtered away so they can't see what they shouldn't see.
Correct.
Okay, clear now. And in true chat fashion, we have, hey, we're talking about roles yet again. Yes, we're talking about roles yet again inside Power BI and how important these are. I guess apparently this is a very hot topic for us.
Well, I mean, so Thomas lays out the backbone for how do you set up something like this, because and to Tommy's point, right, like a centralized, we've discussed having a single semantic model and creating thin reports off of it, right? And I think it's a great model to extend the same logic, the same data sets, the same everything, and extend like what you're building an ecosystem. This I think is a great article to talk about, because there's some nuance here, but it starts with the workspace and the roles, right? Like what are the things within a workspace that individuals typically have access to, right? Admin can do anything. Member and contributor can both publish, right, content in semantic models, and viewers can just view. But within that workspace, right, we can't assign any of these roles to a contributor that has to build something and have row level security applied within that workspace, right? So how do you set up this scenario where I have a semantic model that people can leverage and extend and build their own reports where RLS is applied? But that's the basis for it is, well, you can't do that in just the singular workspace in that way without all the content creators building their own stuff.
So
we're seeing all the data.
There's two. I mean, Tom has a really good diagram. You kind of have to really look at his diagram that he's provided to you in the article. And great, because this is a podcast, you can't really see it. Okay, so we'll try to describe it, I guess, a little bit here. So definitely, if you are listening or running or doing something activity-wise, we encourage, good job, keep going. But when you get back to your computer, you should definitely go click on the link in the description and go hit up the image that is produced here, because there is two distinct workspaces. And I think something that I find many people stumble on when we're talking about workspaces and who has access to things, you can get access to semantic models without actually having access to the workspace. The workspace is intended for people who are building stuff inside that workspace. And I think this is a good example of this, where a viewer of a workspace, so if you add a user as a viewer, they can see the models, they can go in there, they would be able to connect to the model, but the row level security will apply to their persona, but they can't publish to that workspace. They have to publish somewhere else. So you could get people viewer access. They'll be able to see things, but not create stuff. And then there's this other kind of pattern of, okay, well, that's potentially one way of getting a content creator to create content. But what do they do when they have that file? Like once they're done with the desktop or whatever they're building, where do they put it? And so you have to kind of give them access to another workspace potentially that would let them publish that content somewhere else. So this really, I mean, in my mind, I don't think I really grasped this whole idea of concept of the content viewer has row level security applied. I don't think I knew that actually. I very rarely use the viewer content. I think the pattern that I use most frequently is giving security groups build permission to a semantic model that lives in a workspace, and then giving the users a different workspace to work off of. Do you guys use this pattern at all today?
So really the biggest application, and again, went on from an individual models rather than giving access to the workspace, usually works again with managed self-service. A lot of times you have access to build off any semantic model in let's say a certified or gold level workspace that the BI teams created, and all the power users and people creating thin reports would do that. Here, though, it's, Tom's also pushing that this is the right way to go, regardless if you're doing role level security. I've only really seen this more mainstream with managed self-service at different organizations where they already have managed self-service set up. So I want to ask you guys, is this a one size? Yeah. So it works great with self-service, but for other types of organization structures, is this also something that you should do regardless?
I think.
Go ahead, Seth.
Can we table this question and walk through like the final solution?
Yeah.
Because the nuance to this implementation, I think, is important. Because yes, he's using multiple workspaces to deploy, but he's also permissioning people directly in the semantic model itself, right? So this this approach I haven't had to implement this, so this is a great article for me to read through, because the nuance here is, rather than granting roles and permissions at a workspace level, it's done on the semantic model level so that these individuals can access that and see that. And he walks through like, how do you manage access within the semantic model? What users are you going to apply to it, et cetera? And that's the key part of like, okay, great. You have a content creator creating a semantic model. The semantic model gets deployed to a workspace that then gets permissioned, right, at the semantic model level, and then these content creators can access it with role level security. So wanted to just carry through that full thought of the article because it's important, because I didn't even, like I said, I don't have this use case where I have RLS on content creator, right? It's just on consumer, and there's the bit of nuance there. So back to your question, like,
so here's the big hurdle here, I think, with this solution is I usually in this structure self-service, I have a workspace that has some marketing semantic models that the BI team's created, and all the power users for marketing can go ahead and take a look at what they want to build. Well, in this context, or the argument here in the article is going through like, well, you have to remove access from the workspace, but per semantic model, give that build permissions in order for the role level security to follow through. That I feel like that's pretty hard to scale, right? So any new semantic model, we're just individually giving build permissions.
So I like where your question's going. So I think this really depends on the size of the organization. So again, knowing that Tom comes from a very large organization, I think the larger your organization becomes, the more you want to focus on a centralized team or centralized data models or data sets that are going to be curated by a group of people. And you're setting up patterns that enable that central designed model to be distributed to many people. So to your point, right? We are talking like self-service to some degree, but you may have a team that's large enough. And I would kind of assume when you get to organizations that have lots of data or working with lots of customers that have lots of information, you might have a team of people that are just content creators, but there are either internal policies or, regulated policies that require that there is clear separation. You can't see all customers' data in a centralized model. So you have to think about where that row level security element is being applied for those content creators. So to your point, Tommy, does it seem clunky to be able to have to manage those individual data sets or semantic models and making sure that the security groups are applied correctly? Yes, it is more management, but I think what we're talking about here is we're talking about an organization that has a lot of people doing a lot of things, and we're trying to build these reusable semantic models for a large scale of people. Like, and I think of it this way: for every one admin of your tenant, you're going to have 5, 10, or admin of a workspace, whatever you want to call it. You're going to have 5 or 10 maybe data modelers, and for every 5 or 10 data modelers, you're going to 10x that. You're going to have, hopefully, for 5, there's going to be like 100 report consumers, right? So you kind of the surface or the number of people that are going to be consuming things, I think, gets larger when you get more towards I'm a pure consumer or I'm a pure data model administrator creator. That number gets less and less to the left-hand side, but then it gets more and more towards the consuming content side. So to your point, Tommy, I don't know if there's an easier way. Maybe maybe using things like VS Code would help us. VS Code is there in Bernanke's example and his thing, is there ability to add permissions to things? Will it be fast, easy? Maybe at some point you actually get to a point here where you're just automating a lot of this. I mean, there may be things here where you're no longer using the UI in Power BI.com because it's getting to be so big that you have to have automated API calls that are just adding security groups to semantic models where you need them versus on the workspaces. I'm finding, my opinion here, the larger your organization becomes, the more you're willing to provide automation around that to make sure that you're getting a regular experience around deploying the same things over and over again with regular content.
So therein lies the problem, though. So let's say, again, I have one model. I have 10 marketing semantic models in a workspace. Yep. We're doing self-service.
Sure.
One of those models, we need to apply the row level security.
Okay.
So the only solution here is then that I have to then either do one of two things. I'm removing everyone build permissions from the workspace because, again, they have access to any marketing model, or I'm creating a separate workspace for low level security specific semantic models, right? Because
I'm already thinking I'm doing that at this point, right? So I think these are strategic decisions that you're making at your organizational level. I think this is where the center of excellence really has to weigh in on these things. I mean, I think this is what your company policy decides.
I don't even think it's company policy though. Right? Like if we break it down, how are you approaching reporting in the organization? Right? And Tommy, I think what you're describing is,
you just said how you're reporting in the organization. You just said it's not an organization decision, and then you just made an organization's comment.
No. Okay. Wrong word.
Sorry,
wrong words. Wrong
I got
words.
hung up on. Okay. I got hung up on words being things.
In general. Okay. Right? Like you're, and I think it is company size, but the reason I made that comment is because I don't think it requires a center of excellence.
Okay.
What I'm saying is how you go about approaching the implementation of reporting, willingly, intentionally or unintentionally, right?
There is a decision being made.
Are two different ways.
Yeah.
And what I think, or what I'm seeing here is the first approach is very self-service. We're getting. It's all the stuff we talk about all the time. Yes. Getting insights to people, data, reporting. They don't have access. Like they now do. We're creating workspaces that they can work within, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that approach is focused on getting people access to data to bring insights.
Sure.
What we're ignoring completely in that approach typically is what Tom is not ignoring, especially in an extremely large organization where, Mike, you absolutely have bodies of people that are making decisions specifically around data governance.
Yep.
And what I would argue is this is an example or an approach of a well-governed organization, because just like Fabric has a future promise of it does not matter where you go. Essentially, we know who you are and what access you should have. And in that vein, right, it doesn't matter who you are in your organization or what reporting tool or workspace, whatever, or wherever you go, you should never see data that you should not be permissioned to see.
Correct.
And this is a design that allows self-service, right, in an environment where nobody has to worry about, like, I'm attaching to the semantic model and I'm building a report, and I'm like, it's useful for me, it's useful for my team, and it's even more useful because it's all predicated on row level security, right? So that I think is, you're gonna have a challenge, Tommy, with how things are set up. And as an organization evolves and says, well, we now have this expectation that everybody can't see everything. How do you go fix that? Because you're going to have to when that shift happens. But that's how I kind of view the different approaches. I don't see it as a problem per se.
Yeah,
Tommy, I see it as an inevitable outcome of where an organization is in their data culture, process of COE, understanding, that every place is an opportunity for somebody to see something they shouldn't, as opposed to you see everything, and yeah, there are certain very specific use cases where role level security is, we know, applied, right?
Yes.
And that's why I think speed to getting things out, like it's not like we're saying business intelligence folks don't care about security, or people seeing data that they should. There are absolutely types of data that are instantly fall into that bucket, but how do we typically manage it? It's probably by the audience, the workspace, who has access to see the data.
Yeah.
Or we're applying like light row level security on top of it, depending. But in systems where the default is security, right, and data governed security, it starts from the central locations and goes downward. It's not an expectation that that's managed way down on all the levels of people who, are now content creators that are sitting in the business units.
Makes total sense here. There's some conversation in the chat here as well, talking about, I made the comment of, hey, we should ask the COE. And so Enterprise AR says, yeah, you should ask the COE. And then he goes, this comment is me looking into the mirror. Hey, COE, what should we do here?
Yeah, exactly.
My comment here around this one is, yes, I understand that many organizations may not have a established center of excellence. But how do you know what you don't know unless you're talking to people that are thinking about this kind of stuff, right? What are the implications of this? This is maybe explicit measures. Maybe the podcast here is some part of an outside voice that's helping you. We're a movement. You're welcome to your COE. Now you have 3 more people to bounce ideas off of. I mean, to some degree, though, it's helpful to have other people in that administrative space to start thinking about, like, this is why we like consuming content, or people that have, like Tom's, administrating huge amounts of things for, his company, right? Great. But it's wonderful to sit down and listen to and really digest what his company is doing, because this is a pattern that he's finding that's working. We need to understand what the pattern is, and should we apply it to our center of excellence or our team? And I think these are the kind of conversations that we're not having on the Microsoft blog. These are not conversations we're having in other sites. So I think this is why this is so relevant for me, because it's really helping me tease out thinking through the implications of, okay, how do I build content with security enabled onto the data levels? This is great.
I'm going back to something as I'm reading the article, I'm hearing what you guys are saying, and we've talked a lot about the structure of the workspaces, but let's talk about the persona here, the person who's actually building the content, not the data, because I think we'll assume that the data builder is going to be probably owning to some extent the role of security, obviously the
correct
semantic model, but there's I think there's some gray area, because when we say the content creator, right, are we saying this in what type of fashion? Are we saying this is someone who is, doing Power BI ad hoc on the fly? Is this one of those power users? And I think that really does change the conversation in terms of what type of access, and more importantly, security. I think there is no one size fits all with a content creator.
I feel like I'm going to point on something here, Tommy, that you're going to not like so much, but I'm going to say it anyways. I think, Tommy, you're a very big proponent of, when there's a central BI team, that team is creating all the content and designing it for everyone to consume throughout the organization. So I really feel like this is a scenario where we're pulling back that security boundary further up and saying, look, we don't want a team that's going to, we're going to build a process that's going to allow people to connect to the data, but we're not going to own the report creation element of what you're doing. So if you want to, so here's our standard measures, here's our standard data sets. This data set is certified. We're going to build this thing. And I think the reason you build this model the way we're talking about here is, the reason I want to build a model with lots of data that some people can't see. The question, as I'm thinking this out loud here, I'm literally real-time streaming this a lot here. Why? The question could be also asked, why would you build a model that has data in it that some people can't see, some people can and cannot see? What's the advantage there, right? So that's maybe a pivotal question. You have to answer that first. I think you do that because every domain or customer or whatever, you have a model that has clear segmentation of the structure is the same, the data is similar for many different audiences. So, I think of the idea of like, it's a model that contains multi-tenant information. Right? It's one big model with many customers' data in the same model. There are sales representatives, or there's people that are only able to see the customers that they belong to. Something along those lines, right? So the idea is the structure of the data doesn't change. And as a strategic decision point, I don't want to manage one model for every single customer. I may have thousands. Okay, that's just not helpful. So how do you do this? And I think now that I'm saying this out loud, I feel like Alex Dupler has had a very similar challenge with some data things that he's been doing with, where he has a similar challenge where they have such large data that he's dealing with. He has to think about many models and manage them all separately for each team of people, right? I have a huge amount of data. I have to send it out to these different sales teams. They have to be able to use these data teams, have to have their own models because the data is just so large. So when you listen to Alex talk about this problem, he's had to build like a whole automated system to create many different models in an automatic way and deploy changes to those models for all these different customers. Like, it gets really complicated if you have to take every single customer and make a single model for each one of them. That's hard. So where I'm going with this is I'm thinking to myself, like, the reason why you build these bigger centralized models with low security is because it's easier for you to manage the one big model. And then now, okay, all I need to do is just carve out the data differently for each team member to build their own stuff. Sorry, there's a lot of thoughts in there that I'm like real time thinking through as you're saying that statement. Did any of that make sense?
No, I think that's great in that particular situation, but I think you're talking about something, while huge in enterprises, is a little more niche for not necessarily every organization is going to have that cross client or the external customer, so to speak, right? Especially, so I'm trying to think about this. If I'm going to apply this, and this is where I'm coming from, if I'm going to really universally apply this approach where my content creators know to go to the event hub or the data hub, the One Lake hub,
Okay.
and I have access to certain certified workspace or semantic models to build off of. And then there are certain ones that I have individual access to with the row level security. That to me would be the universal approach for any content creator, whether it's someone who we call a power user who's building measures, report level measures, and they know all the cool features in the Power BI service, or it's someone who, like I said, is a little more ad hoc and they just know how to drag and drop. Regardless if you're this huge industrial approach, because you have like Alex Dupler, I know exactly the situation you're talking about. I think it was a series of tweets that more data than we can imagine, but that's not the case with the typical, we'll call it the typical org, or let's say the common semantic model, the common boilerplate. So I would argue, honestly, different than what you said, that I want BI, the centralized BI team to own the report and the model. Mm-hmm. I've changed my, my tune with that.
I know, but I'm just saying, I think
I will say,
yep.
When you are creating the model and you're also creating the report, if you're too far removed from those needs, that collaboration between how are we going to build the model, not just from a tabular point of view, but also how, like what are the users needing? When I'm in that forefront of the technical and understanding, okay, here are the metrics that they need. Okay, here's the situations that I was not aware of that I learned from the stakeholders. If I'm just a semantic model builder, I'm not front facing with the stakeholders. I'm really only working with the content creators, right?
Yeah, but I think this is the difference too. That goes back to my previous point of where you're at as an organization, right? Because if your focus is data governance and semantic models that are applied, you're applying row level security to, so a bunch of content creators can go create things. I'm also making the assumption that you've probably got some pretty solid warehouses or data marts or things that are the standard things for the organization.
Yes.
Right. Like we're
Agreed.
not in this realm of, I don't know what metrics you need and I'm going to build them one off and, kind of thing. I think these are those sources of information that are just used throughout the organization. Somebody wants to go build their own stuff.
Yes.
Does that mean every single semantic model fits this mode? I don't know. I don't think so. Like you're always going to have business cases where somebody's spooling up off of their own thing, or you're still in the same realm that you're saying is a problem right now, because you're saying, I guess what I'm hearing from you is, do we have to apply this architecture to every single workspace, semantic model, user, etc.? No, I don't think so. I think it is separated out to some degree, and these would be managed data sets by teams, right? Managed semantic models that others can use, but the specification is there's role of security applied to them. I don't think you roll everything onto this,
So
because you'd still need self-service.
This is true. Tom does speak. There's actually in the first paragraph, he says there are more reasons to separate the data from the content that are not due to RLS. That's going to be the part 2 article that's not out yet.
Sure.
So, and you're absolutely right. But I guess my concerns here, as I'm thinking about this, is the role level security situation makes a lot of sense, perfect sense. But if again, does that lead to a poorer experience for our content creators? Like
But that, and this is where I say it depends on where the organization is. If there is all it takes is, hey, somebody saw something they shouldn't have and they shared it and they're fired, but we are now as an organization going to take data security as our number one priority. Yep, everything changes, Tommy, right? Like every architecture you ever had means that it goes through this model. What's fantastic about this article is we now have a path to go do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this is like, you do have data security and governance and things you can and can't do that will put roadblocks into just your random implementation of Power BI, right? Because you have to follow policies, you have to follow structures. And if one of those things eventually in an organization is anybody who's accessing data in our system should never see something that they're not specifically assigned to see, then these are the types of solutions that you need, but also are supported in Fabric and the Power BI ecosystem, even without like the full one security thing yet.
And this is where I'm really I'm not sure how to articulate this point here, but I feel like you're making a lot of solid points, Seth, around the maturity of the organization to get to this level. Probably there's already been some muscle memory being built in the organization to do this already, right? I think there's kind of 2 approaches to how you can look at this article. One, I'm brand new to Power BI. We're just trying to figure things out. We know this is interesting. Maybe we should apply some relative security. So I think there's kind of like this new approach, but there's also this approach of, hey, we're moving into Power BI from other systems. It may have been Qlik, it may be Tableau, it may be other reporting things, and you've already built solutions that use those tools, and now you're transitioning into the Power BI world, but you already have data marts. You already know your data, right? Not every organization is trying to figure out what their requirements are for what reporting should look like. This may be a very well-known entity. I'm working with an organization right now. They've got many, many years of how they want to have the data reported. They know exactly what measures and dimensions they need on every single report because they have existing reporting that they're using today that they're migrating off of into Power BI. So in this example, we have a very well-known, here's how we think the data needs to be presented. Now we have to articulate that into, okay, let's transform our known experience of warehousing, data modeling into Power BI, role of security, and now thin reports and models. One thing I would point out in this article, I like how Tom has listed there's a data workspace and there's a content workspace. I will say, me personally, I don't use those languages with customers. I talk more about the semantic model and the thin report. That's just the language I use. I think we're saying the same things in this world. I have the semantic model workspace and I have thin report workspaces. And I think it's the same concept of what we're trying to get at here as well. Anyways, my opinion here is it seems like he's making it's a good language, but that's just not the language I use when I talk about models and thin reports.
Well, we're always talking about how we need to redesign our workspaces in Fabric.
True.
So I guess to make one last point about like the differences with where organizations are at and where this is relevant. If you were to listen to us today and you have a small organization and they have no visibility into data right now, and you were like, you know what, security and governance is the number one important thing. So I'm going to take more time to set up this architecture so that we can create these semantic models with role of security so that nobody has access to data that they shouldn't. The answer is likely going to be something like, I'm glad you're thinking about that, but I can't see anything right now, right?
Mhm.
Like, let's solve that in the future. But right now, I really need to make this important decision and you need to build me a report. Just share it with me. Or this should just be shared with you, things. And this is the evolution, right? Like, get people the insights they need to make good business decisions versus, okay, we have access to all the data. We actually have a lot more users that want to use, get access and start building things. We need to secure this because we don't know who's going to be accessing all of this stuff. Once we say, yep, this user group can now, go get access to this data. We need to solve that before we open the floodgates on our organization. Please set up an architecture that's going to support that. Those are two wildly different things on the roadmap of where you want to be in your organization as it relates to data and reporting.
Yeah, and that's also assuming, to Seth's point, that you already do have the COE and a pretty solid process already set up. You would have to.
No, I think it's something that anyone who listens to the podcast could say, okay, well, where am I in my organization? I'm the single man person. Like, if our organization is going to grow and scale in this thing, here's the roadmap of how I'm going to drive reporting forward, right? Are you the individual that's just building reports at ad hoc as the business needs them? Or are you the driver for making business intelligence better within the organization, right? So one could argue it's not my job, whatever. I'm just saying, like, there is a path that you should set up and have if you are the guy or the leader of a team, no matter how big, saying, here's where I want to go and here's incrementally the things we need to work towards to get there. And this is well before, like, I could have 10 steps before I get to, we need to establish a COE, right? And that really is just like, okay, our COE is going to be, as one of our listeners was like, I'm going to ask myself in the mirror, hey, COE, right? Like, it could be that. But that's the organization recognizing the person, saying, hey, here are the things that, we're going to run past you and the processes that we're following based on your advice and what you're building for the organization. It doesn't have to be the 20-person COE, right? In the 10,000, person organization. So I'm just saying, like, there's steps to building the blocks of, like, things you need to support your solutions, the broader they get within the organization.
There's a really good comment that came up here. I just want to close this up as we kind of wrap with final thoughts here. Adrian says, go Google see Power BI usage scenario diagrams. And this is a lot of what appears to me is like either Kurt has done this or this is like initial work that was done by Melissa Coates, kind of talking through advanced scenarios. I put the link in the chat window here as well, and I'll make sure I include this as well. This is really helpful. It talks about, hey, are you advanced model preparation? Are you doing customizable managed self-service? Are you doing departmental BI, embed for your customers, embed for your organization, enterprise BI, managed self-service, on-premise reporting? There's a whole like personal BI. There's a whole bunch of patterns of like, what are the things that we should be thinking about inside the diagram of Power BI? And there's I don't know, team, departmental, enterprise. It goes through kind of all the different levels. And then it even talks about like some of the advanced things that you'd be doing. Don't feel like you have to do all these architectures. You kind of have to pick which one will work for your organization. And you may start at a team BI, work up to departmental, and then eventually move yourself into enterprise as the solution grows. But not every company is going to have the same build or structure, which is nice about Fabric, but it also is hurtful about Fabric. It means you now need to know the different versions of reporting and what works best for your organization. So anyways, I thought that was a very relevant link to put out there as well.
That's a cool link.
I'll give my final thoughts here. So I think this is a great article. I like where Tom's going with the managed self-service pieces. Definitely worth a read. I do think this is more for larger organizations that have needs around larger models for many people to consume, and you're trying to delineate between different content creators based on their permissions to data. So very relevant, super helpful here. The only change I would make probably would be is I would call it a model and a thin report. So we have model workspaces and we have thin report workspaces. So very, very neat article. Really liked it. Definitely am using this today. I'm already using this, and I'm actually teaching this to organizations today that are growing into this. They have other systems, and they're trying to figure out how to leverage this because they do realize those bigger, larger, centralized models do make sense in certain use cases. But this also pairs with team and departmental BI as well. So this doesn't have to be. This is not every model you're building doesn't always fit this. Tommy, any final thoughts?
I think the biggest thing is it's going to go back to training and awareness. However, you roll this down to your point, this is more than just self-service, but that plan, and I have no idea those diagrams existed, and it looks like all Kurt Bueller designed. That's a great place to start, and putting together the plan first off to, I think, kind of sum up everyone's point. And the training and the awareness on how you're going to roll it out is going to be pivotal, because the technology alone is not going to solve it, no matter if you separate them or if you combine them. But making sure people understand where they need to go, who's in charge of what. But I really do love the model workspace and the thin report workspace for more than just self-service.
Awesome. Seth, I think you've already given your final thoughts. Any other comments as you want to wrap up here?
I love the article. It's definitely worth a read. Go learn this security first pattern with data. And I love these conversations, man. Like, I did not know this link existed. So getting that from the audience is even better. Double win today.
All right, there we go. Welcome to your rent a COE. This comment and commentary was free. There is no warranty with this recommendations or how this goes. So, take this for what you will. Hopefully, if nothing else, this is going to spur some internal conversation at your company about what you should be doing with your organization and potentially thinking about options for how you want to handle and govern your center of excellence. If you don't have another center of excellence person, you're welcome to use the Explicit Measures podcast as your sounding board for some of these COE topics, which apparently we do a lot of this anyways. Maybe we should rename ourselves. This should be the Rent a COE Explicit Measures podcast. maybe not. With that, thank you very much. We appreciate your ears and your listening for what we're talking about today. We hope you have found some value from this. If nothing else, there's a couple links here that may be relevant that you didn't know about that you would like to click into. So definitely check those out as well. With that, we only ask for you as the listener, it's free to you. Let someone else know. Let someone else know you found this article interesting. Let someone else, reach out to Tom. Tom's got a little comment section at the bottom of his article. If you hit it and you have questions or you want to know more about it, go talk to Tom. He's a great guy. He would love to probably have some more feedback there. Please share this podcast with somebody else. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps out a ton. Do you have a question, an idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Head over to powerbi.tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. Awesome. Finally, if you want us to live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m., you'll enjoy the conversation on all powerbi.tips social media channels.
You put the pause in too long. I thought we were done.
Sorry, I thought it's a line break.
All right. Well, we flubbed the whole end of this episode. Well, there you go. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time.